So it's interesting how you meet Barry. Barry and I were talking. We were in San Francisco, and we were overlooking one of the bridges out there, just enjoying a nice glass of wine. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could come out and do a talk for us? And it's hard to track Barry down. He's from the Bay Area, but he's hardly in the Bay Area. If you see some of his messages, he's constantly traveling around. He's in Europe. He's in New York. He did a class recently here in San Francisco. And he continues to write some phenomenal blogs. But he actually spent some time with Jez Humble writing The Lean Enterprise. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you Barry O'Reilly.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, everybody. I always like to open with this quote. When Stacey's talking about feeling a little bit uncomfortable, I think this is really what uncomfort looks like for us at the moment. For most organizations right now, they have 21st century enabled technology, yet they're holding on to a lot of the management principles from the 20th century and still, some of them even into the 19th century. Who has a friend that works in a company a little bit like this? Right, so it's one of these big challenges we have. We're able to learn more about our customers. We hand at higher fidelity, at a greater pace. Yet we're not using any of these new technologies to inform and adapt our behaviors, to change the way that we lead organizations. We're still using a lot of the same processes and operating mechanisms as from the 19th century. Annual budgeting. Why do we do that? Because it takes the sun a year to go around the earth? Annual performance reviews. Who's ever been in an annual performance review that they really enjoyed? Right, so these are big batch processes. They're conflated. They're slow. It's difficult to get a signal to noise and understand what's the actual challenge. Have we achieved the outcomes that we wanted? Most organizations are still trying to use predictive methods to manage complex systems. When you start a new initiative, the first question you're normally asked is, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? On time, on budget, on scope, outputs. But really, what we're working in is a complex adaptive system where you only need one minor change to the way that you planned, and it can have a profound effect on how that system operates. And the best way that we know to understand and explore complex systems is through experimentation, through testing and learning how the system operates, and use that information to feed forward to the decisions we make. And this is a real challenge for most organizations. Fortune 500, I coach a lot of the executive teams in these companies, and my clients are disappearing. It's kind of funny. 57% of them are gone in the last 20 years. 49% of them think that they're going to grow through cost reduction. Only 29% think that they're going to grow through new products and services. If you met this person, how would you describe them? Would you see them as a growth mindset? Are they trying to hold on to what they've got for dear life? So we've got these sort of behaviors, even the way the personalities of these companies, they don't see the future about growing and learning and exploring new ground. Every time I ask the execs about this, they're like, don't worry, Barry, we're building a mobile app. Then I have to explain to them that mobile apps don't matter anymore. Google already inject content straight into the search results. I work at Singularity University. 2 or 3 years' time, the way you're going to be digesting content is fundamentally different from how you're consuming it today. Content is the product, not the channel that people deliver it through. So this isn't going to save their organization. But meanwhile, back at base, they have these highly collaborative, open environments where it's easy to innovate. I joke at 5 o'clock you get to escape to this area. But we start to inflect the internal complexity of our business onto our customers. And the banks are a classic example of this. So I ring up my bank and I get sent to cubicle 4786. I'd like to find my bank balance. And they're like, oh, it's zero. I'm like, oh, well, can I get a loan? Oh, well, that's not my department. I got to transfer you to cubicle 7685 over here. And it's I have to say all the same information again. I lose context. I lose handover information. It's just frustrating for everybody. You ship your org chart onto your customers. And if you're shipping your internal complexity onto your customers, you're really going to struggle. But there's a gap even in terms about how employees are engaged in their companies. So Gallup surveys are actually, this is where you poll how engaged companies are in their workforce, and they're at record lows. Only 30% of people in North America are actively engaged in their work. And this is generally because most people are measured on output, not outcomes. They're measured on, did you build all the features that we dreamed up a year ago? Did you deliver them on the date that we said you had to deliver them by 2 years ago? Did you spend your budget and not a penny less, not a penny more? Rather than, are we actually affecting the outcomes of our customers? Have we reduced our operating costs by 20%? Have we increased our customer retention by 15%? Outcomes where people can figure out how they work towards it, not measured on what they have done and if they did it on time, on budget, on scope. Because guess what? If you build the worst product in the world on time, on budget, on scope, it's still the worst product in the world. But there's a challenge here now, because there's also a gap not only in terms of how employees are engaged in companies, but also what leadership of organizations understand their customers want. So Bain did a study quite recently where they surveyed leadership from about 375 of the world's largest organizations. And they asked them, how well do you think you're delivering to your customers? And then they were kind enough to go and ask the customers of those companies, how well did they think the companies were delivering to them? Right, so out of 100%, how many leadership teams thought they were doing a great job delivering to customers? 100%, yeah, of course. Any more? 90, okay. What about the customers then? When they spoke to the customers of those companies, how good a job did they think the teams were doing delivering to them? 10, 40. There you go. 80 to 80. So when you talk about a 10x improvement, this is a 10x gap in understanding about what you're actually achieving for your customers and whether it's true. So these gaps exist everywhere in your organization. We've gaps in employees, we've gaps in terms of customers, so we've got to mind the gap. Because software is eating the world. Yet in most organizations that I spend time with, I'm still seeing their internal gaps where they talk about the scary business and the technology group. IT seen as a cost center. When you think about the highest performing organizations in the world right now, are they technology companies? Or do they operate in only a single business domain? Or do they meld these two things together? So what we've seen from spending time with a lot of the leadership teams of these organizations and helping companies change the way they fundamentally operate and achieve higher performance at scale is these 5 principles. The first one is technology is a strategic capability. If you do not see this technology as a core enabler for your business, you're going to struggle. If you think about the top leading organizations now and the Fortune 500 companies, they're all technology-based companies. They use technology to learn quicker, faster, and a higher fidelity about what their customers do, how they interact with them, how their services perform, how they can respond to these changing circumstances around them. A willingness to support experimentation. So when you are operating in a complex domain, trying to use predictive methods to guess 6 months, 12 months out about all the things that you're going to do and what day it's going to be done and how long it's going to cost is a fallacy. You have to experiment your way to find the answers to these complex and challenging obstacles and opportunities we're trying to face. And if you do not have an organization that accepts that and embraces experimentation to learn and gather information to make good decisions, you're going to struggle. And the way that we manage and govern that is using iterative and adaptive working practices. If you are doing your iteration once a year, one planning process a year, one performance review process a year, one budgeting process a year, that means you have one opportunity to make a governing decision. When you're working in highly uncertain domains, you need to favor shorter, faster, quicker iteration to help you make more decisions as you deal with that complexity and gather information to make good decisions. Your rate of iteration should match your rate of uncertainty. Reduce learning anxiety across the organization. Now, this is quite an interesting one. Edgar Stein is one of the fundamental thinkers on organizational psychology, and he talks about two levers. You have survival anxiety and learning anxiety. Now, survival anxiety is the idea where it creates a sense of urgency in people. If you don't do something, your business is going to die. If we don't change the way we work, our business is going to die. Who has been in a meeting in the last 4 hours who was told if they don't do something, their business is going to die? Right, so it maxes out. There's a point where people stop listening to this idea of urgency. But on the other side of that coin, there's a tap that never runs dry, and that's reducing learning anxiety. And learning anxiety is the idea of how comfortable do I feel to try new things and maybe not be perfectly successful at them. How willing am I to try and learn new techniques and maybe they might not work? If the learning anxiety is high in your organization, what do you think happens? That's nothing, because people are afraid to try anything. So your role as leaders and your tap of endless performance improvement is working hard to reduce learning anxiety across your organization. Because the lower it is, the more things people will try, and the more things they try, the more things they'll experiment, and the more things they'll find to higher performance and improvement. And then finally, the ability to innovate at scale. And this is one of the big fallacies of a lot of these scaling frameworks. Doing a one-page diagram is not innovation at scale. Copying this one innovation team that has a stand-up at 9:15 every morning, so everyone better have a stand-up at 9:15, is not innovation at scale. People learn from the lessons and experiences of others. You're all here today because you're going to hear stories from people in different organizations of things that they tried, things that worked, things that they would do differently. You're going to hear about a series of strategies and tactics that people deployed to solve a problem that they had. I'll never know your domain as well as you do. So you'll take those stories and you'll run those stories against your internal mental model of your own domain. And you'll come up with things that you could try in your domain that are more likely to work in the context that you operate in. Getting people to share their stories and using those lessons to help other people innovate is how you drive innovation at scale. You don't do a one-page diagram. So what I'm going to tell you to do, or share with you over the next few minutes, is talking about purposeful organizations. How do we start to get alignment at scale when we're trying to drive and lead hundreds of people in an organization? I'm going to talk a little bit about designing systems of work and how you can accelerate the way that you deliver. And then finally, I'm going to talk about transforming your organization and the different parts of that. Sound okay? Cool. So, orient. Purposeful organizations, mission-led, to drive high alignment at scale. So normally when I talk about driving alignment at scale or high-performance organizations, invariably the Army comes up. And everyone's like, yeah, Barry, the Army are high-performance company at scale, and they use command and control. So that's what we're going to use in our company. And then I have to explain to them that the Army actually abandoned command and control in the 18th century after the Napoleonic War. Because they realized when soldiers were in situations of opportunity or threat, they didn't have time to write a 200-page requirements document and get it signed off by their manager, who could pass that up eventually to Napoleon and send the orders back down. No, they were probably dead or the opportunity had passed. So what they actually do in the Army is they talk about outcomes. And people who work in any sort of deployment or group will talk to you about the key piece of information for any mission is the principle of mission. What's the key outcome that we're trying to achieve? So I know my role and my mission is to take that hill. And then based on, that's the outcome we need to achieve. And then based on my skills, my competencies, the things that I know what to do and don't, I'm going to be trusted to make decisions that are aligned towards achieving that outcome in the context that I'm in. The powerful thing about this is that you bring the people at the edge of your systems closest to the situations who have the most context to make decisions aligned to the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. That allows you to move fast at scale because you're pushing decisions down to the front line of the system and trusting your employees to make good decisions based on the outcomes that you're communicating to them to achieve. Now, there's really great models around this, and my favorite book on this is by a guy called Steve Bungay, The Art of Action. Has anyone read that book? If you haven't, 2 people have, write it down in your notepad. That's the top reading book. It's amazing. Because Stephen talks about mission command, which is the alternative to command and control. The idea is that we're all in the business of achieving great outcomes, be it for our customers, for our teams, what we're trying to achieve. And outcomes are based on us creating a plan. Plans is then generally comprised of actions, and if we follow the actions, we'll achieve the outcomes that we want. Now, there's a number of gaps that appear when we're doing this operating condition. You've got the knowledge gap between the outcome you want and the way you create a plan. There's often gaps there. You've an alignment gap between the plans and the actions about will they actually achieve the things that you want, and then you've an effects gap. So by performing the actions, do we actually achieve the outcomes we want? Now, what happens in low-performance organizations is they have a bias for precision over accuracy, and they're over-invest in precision at all steps of the process. So who here is currently working on a 3-year business transformation plan? So it's okay, you don't have to hang your head in shame. We're all there. It's okay. Yeah, okay. So what happens in low-performance organizations is they ask for precision at each one of these steps. So first of all, they want to know, well, if we're going to deliver this 3-year plan, I want to see all the things that you're going to do over the next 3 years to make sure that this plan works correctly. And then once they've got the plan, then they want to see all the actions that you're going to perform over the next 3 years, right down to task breakdowns of all the small steps that you're going to take to make sure that it's done and that you've thought about it. And then when you're finished doing all that, just to make sure that you don't do anything that doesn't allow you to deviate from the plan and all the actions that they make you sign off, you get a lovely set of KPIs about what dates and what time and how much you're going to spend on every single one of these things. Who has a friend that's worked in a company like this? And what happens after you invested all those fantastic months and hours creating this perfectly crafted plan with high precision across the entire thing? It all changes, right? So we've overinvested in precision to reduce uncertainty, but it doesn't. What happens in high-performance organizations is this. The leadership focus on communicating what is the key outcomes that we're trying to achieve. What is the mission? What is the principle of mission that we're trying to achieve? And then they shut up. And they engage their most valuable asset to figure out how they might get there. And they encourage their teams to come up with ways about how they would start to achieve those outcomes. And when people are struggling to understand how they might do it, the role of leadership is to focus more on the intent, not to tell people how to do it, because they used to do that job 5 years ago and they know the line of code you need to change. Ridiculous. Times have changed, things have moved on. So when there's more questions, the role of leadership is to describe why this is important and what success looks like, and then engage their teams to figure out how to get there. As their teams generate options about how to get there, then you govern it through iterative and adaptive working practices by going through this loop at the same speed of the uncertainty that you're trying to address. So I coach the executive team of, I think it's like the 8th largest bank in America now. And this is how we got rid of their massive planning processes for everything. We talk about transformational target conditions. What are the key outcomes that the teams are working towards, and how can we frame the work as a hypothesis, a belief, then that the teams can develop experiments to test that hypothesis to see if it's true or not. So we write workers saying we believe by performing this work we'll achieve a certain outcome, and we'll know this is true when we see the measurable outcomes, not outputs. Now there's a real trick about helping people move from talking about outputs to outcomes. You get them to tell stories. So when I sit down with the leadership team and they want to change fundamentally the way that they run their banking systems, I'm like, well, tell me what this experience is like for your customer. What would be the ideal scenarios? What would be success for your customers? And they'll start to tell you amazing stories. That whenever they ring, we can fix their issue first time. That they're buying more of our products. That they're recommending to us in the market. That we're getting faster in terms of the products that we're spending with us, and they're buying more things with us. Now, the really powerful thing about when you get people to tell stories is they talk about behaviors that people would perform. And the great thing about behaviors is that they're observable. And if they're observable, that means they're measurable. So once you get people to tell stories about the behaviors your customers would be performing, your teams would be performing, you can measure them. And then all you got to decide is how much you want to quantify them. Would it be 1 in 10 customers that would feel like this? 2 in 10 customers? 5? This is how we start to then write a whole planning process for the leadership team of the 8th largest bank in America. We believe leading business agility will increase the adaptability and resilience of our organization. We'll know this is true when 80% of our customers agree we've improved the quality of service, that we're fixing their issues first time, that their promoter scores are going up. And then they shut up. And then they encourage their teams to figure out how might we get here. And then they use iterative and adaptive practices to get there. They just blow away the whole annual planning process, because they're defining success for initiatives and then speed of iteration that they need to match the uncertainty of the initiative that they're doing and manage it through iterative and adaptive working practices. And this works for everything. It's not just for customers. It's about the health of the teams and how well they're collaborating with one another. How transparent is the work, that people know what they're actually achieving and contributing to. How performance are the teams? Do they know when to get feedback? Are they actively soliciting feedback from customers? These are very, very simple things that by just using an experimental approach, by defining hypotheses, and then encouraging teams to come up with experiments to move towards these success criteria, that you start to drive alignment at scale and innovation at scale. This is one of the first things I do with teams. I just set up their mission command. Get your teams together and describe the outcomes that you're trying to work towards, what iteration cadence you need, and then how you will measure success as you move towards those things. Accelerate. So now once we know what and why something is important, we've got to accelerate the speed at which we deliver. Now, for most organizations, they're trapped in the process madness of plan-do loops. So it's our favorite time of year now, right? Coming into November. Who here is currently working on their plan for next year? Right, and this is how the story goes. Around October, November, you start working on the plan for 2018. And you work on your plan, and you're busy working on your plan for 3 months, and then it gets to the end of the year, and then you have a nice holiday, and you come back. But you can't actually get a meeting with anybody to go through the plan and get it signed off. So you spend the next few months trying to get the meetings organized. By that time, your plan's already starting to go out of date. Eventually, you get your plan signed off. You're 3 months into the year. You haven't done half of the stuff that you were meant to get done. You start working on the plan. Then you got to do a replan in January because the plan's obviously wrong. Invest all that time on that. Start to try and get there. Get beat up by management for not delivering the plan. And then we're getting towards the end of the year and people are asking how the plan's going. And you're like, don't worry about last year's plan. I'm working on next year's plan. It's the plan-do loop. It says plan, do, plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. High performance organizations add a check to act. They're constantly iterating at speed about having a hypothesis about what they're trying to move towards, and then experiments to go through and measure the outcomes that they're getting. Just to make everybody feel a little more uncomfortable, this is Jeff Bezos laughing, because in 2011, Amazon were doing over 1,000 deployments an hour. That means that they, almost 6 years ago, were going through a learning loop 1,000 times an hour. How fast are people deploying software here? That's how fast people are learning. Because, again, we're in the information age. Whoever accumulates the most amount of knowledge and uses that knowledge to inform their decision-making wins. If you're doing one release a year, that's one opportunity to learn a year. If you're doing one release every 11 seconds, 6 years ago, you're probably going to learn a lot of stuff. And you're going to learn in a safe-to-fail manner. So what I do with organizations is I try to help them understand their end-to-end systems of work. What are all the components involved in bringing these ideas to life? And I get the team to sit down and describe the direction or the outcomes that they're trying to move towards. So this is working with a healthcare company. They're about $500 million revenue a year. And what we were trying to do was map their end-to-end systems of work. So from the moment they have an idea until they get it out into production and collect feedback from their customers, who are all the different people that are involved in that? And how long do the handovers take at different stage? I generally do this with a cross-functional group because you want everyone to understand from the moment we have an idea right through till we get a production, what are the blockages in that system of work? Have finance there, have HR there, legal, compliance, everyone designing and building these systems of work. And what we're monitoring is the process time. How much time are we actually working on stuff? Plus the lead time, which is actually working on stuff, plus queuing times, and then eventually accurate and complete. So how much rework is there in the system? And what this starts to expose very, very quickly, and you can probably see these red dots, they're pain points. Where are some of the challenges teams have with handovers and queues? And I get teams to describe their current condition, their current operating systems of work. Well, how is it currently operating? With a cross-functional group understanding the steps in the process, who's involved, what are the obstacles and enabler at each one of these steps. Doing these activities in cross-functional groups is really, really, really powerful because you build empathy for one another and you understand the constraints that people are working on in different parts of the system. Now, once you've decided the current condition about where you're at, what I start to do is employ a method of the improvement kata, and this is what essentially a habitual way of working within Toyota. Mike Rothard, who wrote the improvement kata, spent 3 years living in Cologne in Germany to try and understand what method do the teams in Toyota actually work under. They don't have a process, they don't have a system, they don't have a name, they call it the Toyota Production System. It's just the way we work. And what they do there is they understand challenges that they're trying to address, current condition of the operating system of the organization. They set a next horizon of a target condition beyond their knowledge threshold, i.e. not an experiment they know the answer to, something they don't. And then they devise experiments about how to move there. And the idea is that you're constantly moving through this process. And this goes up and down the entire organization. So at the moment in Toyota, they have a challenge to have zero emissions from the cars globally. And then each car, say the Prius, its current condition I think is around 9%, and the target condition that they're trying to work towards over the next sort of 6 months I think is to get it down to 7. And then teams are devising experiments about how to move there. So this is a process that they use not only to run the companies but to run the teams, propagating up and down the whole company. So once you've described a challenge about trying to increase your systems of work, the performance of them by 50%, say, and you've described your target condition or current condition, you can start to describe a target condition that you want to move towards. So this is like your CTO, head of marketing, head of product, legal, finance, all these people sitting together describing if we wanted to deploy software 50% faster than we're doing now, what would we need to do? And the reason that you want people to stretch their thinking is because if you say 5% improvement, people just try to do the same things they're doing now, but just a little faster. So you need to get people to break out of their existing mindset, as Stacey was saying. What are the things that we might need to do? Should we automate things? Should we change this process entirely? Is it really working as we expand? And this is really what true agility thinking is about. So once I describe these target conditions, really what we've got is a current state and then a hypothesis about where we'd like to move our system of work to. Again, I get them to describe the process steps, the timings that they believe they could get to, maybe some of the documents that might be an output of the result. Oh, and then I get them to share this back to people for feedback. because they don't know all the answers. Engage your customers for feedback and help them improve the resiliency of your model to make it better. And share knowledge across the organization about the things that you're trying to work and what works and what doesn't work. Now, because we've formulated a target condition that's a hypothesis, I then get people to start describing their work as a hypothesis statement to test. So I don't use agile user stories. I get people to try and frame their work as a hypothesis to be tested in an experiment to be run. So you get these experimental approaches going up and down your entire company. And then people come up with loads of experiments. So if this is our current condition and this is our target condition, what experiments might we run to move towards the target condition? Here's an example of one. We believe that showcasing work as soon as it's complete will result in reduced work queuing time. We'll have confidence to proceed when we see improvement in our cycle time by 15% in our next iteration. So what we're constantly trying to do is reduce queuing time of work. Who here has had work completed in their backlog but no stakeholder to sign it off for more than 2 iterations? That kills your agility, that kills your speed. Because as soon as you have a result, you want to test it with your customers and get feedback to improve it. Now, the interesting thing about when you're changing these systems of work, I don't use backlogs. I think it's a really difficult way to describe a complex system. I use a lot of radars. Because it's interesting when you start to think about all the different constituents of the work that you're trying to do. And I break it down generally by the process changes you need to make, the people changes, the tools, the technologies that you might need to do, and how they interrelate and play with one another. And then I apply Agile and Lean principles to that. I don't try and change everything. I limit the amount of change in progress. I work in smaller batches of change, so we can get a better signal to the work that we're doing. Is it achieving the outcomes that we want? And then using that to iterate. So what are the things we'll start with now? What will we do next? And what will we do later? But this is a great way to describe to your stakeholders of all the different components that's involved in changing the way that you work and how they potentially play with one another. And then we run the experiments. Getting cross-functional teams together to test those experiments with their customers. So if you're making a process change in your organization, who's your customer? Right. It's the people using that process. So use their feedback to inform, is that process change being successful? If you change your performance review process, talk to the people that go through that process and see what's worked, what hasn't, and how you can improve it. All of this thinking applies to not just products, but services, the way you interact with everybody in your company. And the way that you make these feedback loops fast and safe to fail is you limit the investment or set explicit short boundaries to force fast feedback loops to happen. And then once you start to do this stuff, you start to share your lessons learned with other people in the organization as you go through this process. And you start to move different components in or out in that system of work that you're going to improve based on what you're learning from performing the first few experiments. Once you start to prototype this up and get real speed, then you can turn it into these nice diagrams that you can ship all over the organization. And people then start to see, wow, there's actually some coherency to what this is about. But you're constantly showing about this system of components that's enabling change in your organization, not a backlog or a spreadsheet that just says, have you done task 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Now we're going to do task 1, 3, 4, 5, 8. Now, next, later, and changing and inspecting and adapting the system as you start to improve the system. So, the last step, transform. And I love this one. Because every executive briefing ever, what happens? What's the speech that everyone's listening to at the moment? Well, it's, we need to transform, right? And what are they really saying? Well, I mean, you all need to transform. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Right? And this is the problem. Everybody thinks that everybody else needs to change, not themselves. We could deploy software more if ops just listened to us. Or we'd build better products if the business just weren't always dropping stuff on our door. Everybody says it's somebody else's problem but their own. And this is the challenge we really need to accept, that it's a collective impact we have by working together. Because most organizations are still trapped in what I affectionately call as the Phoenix Project. And everyone knows this, right? Like their business sort of starts to slide, and then there's like the big transformation program. It's typically called Phoenix. And then everybody knows, oh yeah, I'm into Project Phoenix. Yeah, I want to do that. I'm on board. And I'm just going to rebrand all the stuff that I'm currently doing with a new set of words and language and just make it look like I'm doing just enough to be on board with Phoenix. Because I know maybe in a year they won't care about it, or leadership will change, or something will happen. And then I can just go back to doing what I've always done and I'm safe again until Phoenix 2 comes around. Right? So there is no systemic improvement. It's people just replicating what they've already done and rebranding it with different names and words, and not actually changing. And that is the biggest killer of agility in your organization. John Shook, who was the first American to be hired by Toyota in a leadership role and developed the training plan program for the people who worked at NUMMI factory, which is now Tesla's factory here in the Bay Area. But what he realized is that you can't just change the way people behave by telling them to change the way you think. Right? You can't just, you'll sit here today and you'll have lots of great information, but if you don't leave here and change the way you behave, do one different thing different tomorrow, you've wasted your investment. In order to change the way people think, you've got to change the way you behave. And by acting in a different way, you start to see the world in a different way. The reason agile teams stopped working in silos and became cross-functional is so teams would actually have to understand the different constraints people were working under. Instead of working in big, long batch processes, we work in small, fast iterations, so we learn more. You're changing the way people behave, and as a result, it changed the way they see the world, and that's what gives you the agile mindset. Does anyone know what this is? It's the Toyota production line, right? So what happened when Toyota were having the massive performance improvement, they used to invite the leadership teams from Ford and General Motors into the factory. And Ford thought that they were crazy doing this, because they'd go in and like take photos of everything about what the factory looked like, and they'd bring them back to America, recreate the factories exactly as they were in the photos. So what do you think happened? Did they have the same performance increase? No, right? Does anyone know what this is? It's the andon cord, right? So the andon cord is a really interesting thing about the Toyota system. So basically, when they recreated these factories in North America, there was this cord hanging over people's head, and they had no idea what it was. It was just in the way. If you're working in Toyota, the factory line is constantly moving, right? I was over with Toyota at the start of the year, and the factory line is constantly moving, right? So if I'm a worker, say my job is, I'm at this station here, and my job is to put the wheel on the car. So the factory line's constantly moving. I pick up my wheel, I start my station here, and I try to put the wheel on the car, and I'm like getting it out, trying to get it on or whatever. If I get to a certain point in my station and I haven't got the wheel on, I pull this cord, and it literally plays like a child's tune through the whole factory. It's like do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then I keep moving and I keep moving. If I get to the end of my station and I haven't got the wheel on the car, the entire production line in the factory stops. The whole factory. And then a manager comes over. What do you think happens? Do they take out a stick and start beating them? Do they tell them how to do their job? Right? Well, first of all, they thank them. Thank you for finding an obstacle in our systems of work. And then they sit there and they devise an experiment about how they can remove that impediment, that obstacle. So maybe they might change the way the wheel is sitting. They might devise a new tool that might help you do that. But they build an experiment right there and then about how they could potentially improve the systems of work. So the difference about what happens at Toyota is there is no Phoenix project. It's just constantly iterating and adapting and improving the systems of work. They're constantly running experiments to improve the systems as they find these obstacles. So There is no Phoenix. It's just constantly a habitual practice of running experiments and improving the systems based on what they're learning. Because they figured this out. Great leaders don't have all the answers. They ask better questions. So when the manager comes over to the employee, they don't sit there and go, "Oh, I used to do your job. I'll just tell you how to do your job because I'm so smart." Now what they do is they actually sit there and ask the employee a series of questions. They ask them 5 questions. This is what they do. Okay, so what is it you're actually trying to achieve? Okay, you're trying to put a wheel on the car. Okay, well, what's happening? Well, oh, you're struggling. The wheel seems to not fit or the bolt doesn't work correctly. Okay, great. So what do you think are the obstacles that are stopping you from being successful in doing that? And it might be the wheel, it might be the nut, it might be the bolt. Well, we can't change all of those things at the same time, so why don't we just pick one thing that we're going to try and improve? And why don't we design an experiment to do that? And what do you think would happen if we deployed that experiment? And then the most important part, how quickly can we find out if that experiment is working as we planned? Subtly, what the leader does is just help the employee break out of their mental logjam and devise a good experiment. And this is the best management trick I know. You know why? Because you don't even have to think. You just have to ask 5 questions and shut up. And people solve problems for themselves because they have the answer. And you're building the capability in themselves and the belief in themselves that they can solve these problems. And ultimately, all you're building is experimental loops and feedback loops. And you manage them by how quickly you want that experiment to run based on the uncertainty that you're facing. So this is what it starts to look like when you're inside organizations. So I get companies to map their end-to-end value streams. These are all the portfolio projects happening. This is one of the largest gaming companies in the world, where they have their whole platform of all the initiatives that they're working on. What's to do, doing, done. Identifies risks and issues, color-coded so people understand, story maps, value streams. Where the leadership are talking about what are the key outcomes that they're trying to achieve, where are we trying to target that in our value streams of work, and then how we can run experiments through the improvement kata to achieve what we're trying to do. And I bring everybody here to have these debates where you're visualizing your work, visualize your systems of work where people understand what it is they're trying to do and how they're going to contribute to that. And what you start to then build is these great virtuous feedback loops up and down your organization. Leadership saying this is what we need to achieve, and teams figuring out how they might do that and share the results. You get these beautiful feedback loops happening up and down your organization, adapting at all levels of the organization. And I get people to meet here. Stop sending reports. Go and see. Get to Gemba. Get out of your seat. Management by walking around. Call it what you want. Just go and talk to people about what are the results they're achieving based on the work that they're performing. And use that information to reevaluate your hypothesis and refine it. Then you run better questions. Remember, you don't have to think. You just got to ask 5 questions and shut up. You'll learn amazing things. And then when you get really powerful is you start to use questions from customers. You start to see that the vision of your organization is a massive hypothesis. The strategy of your organization is a hypothesis that needs to be tested through experiments or work that you're going to perform. You start to change the whole organization to be an iterative and adaptive mechanism. That's what true business agility is about. So in conclusion, the thing I want you to think about today is this. Stop doing transformational change programs. Do continuous transformation. This is the way we're going to operate in. You need clear outcomes for people about the principle of mission, about what outcome it is they're trying to achieve, and how they can work there. Be clear about your systems of work and understand where you're trying to target. Use value stream mapping or tools that help create alignment across your organization, the end-to-end systems of work. And then finally, transformation means transforming yourselves, not just other people. think about what behaviors that you can take away from here today and deploy them in your organization when you go back. So it's been a real pleasure to speak to you this morning. Have a fantastic day. We've just launched new online courses. You can have 30% off them, massive discounts for everybody here, so please, I'll tweet about it, take the photos if you want. And then if you want to join my newsletter, it's down here, execcampnews.com, and I'll send you copies of slides and lots of other cool stuff as well. Thanks very much, Stacey, and everyone, the sponsors, for having me here. It's been fantastic. I'll be around on the breaks to sign some books and say hello. Thank you very much.